Welcome back to The Explainer. Let's just dive right in, shall we? If you really stop and think about it, the human body isn't just a biological vessel you walk around in. It is a highly efficient, heavily automated microscopic factory. Every single second, literally billions of chemical reactions are perfectly choreographed just to keep you alive, breathing, and thinking. So today, we are going to break down the biochemical building blocks of the cellular factory, straight from the foundational science, and see exactly what makes us tick at the molecular level.
Here's our roadmap for the day. We're going to start on the factory floor, then we'll check out carbohydrates for that fast fuel, lipids for storage, proteins for the actual machinery, and finally, nucleic acids for the master blueprints.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the cellular factory floor.
Now, before we can start building these complex biological machines, we have to look at the raw materials. And honestly, it's pretty staggering. 96% of your body mass is built from just 4 bulk elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. That leaves a mere 4% for literally everything else. And right at the very heart of that 96% is carbon. Carbon has this amazing property called tetravalency. Basically, its ability to form 4 stable bonds to create rings and long chains. That makes it the absolute structural backbone of all the biomolecules we're about to look at. Without carbon's unique chemistry, this entire factory just doesn't exist.
But these elements need a medium to actually react in, and that is water. It's the universal solvent making up roughly 60 to 70% of your body weight. Now, inside this watery environment, pH is absolutely everything. Normal arterial blood pH is tightly held in this incredibly narrow range of 735 to 745. If it drops or spikes even a tiny bit, proteins denature and the factory grinds to a halt. This fragile balance is maintained by buffer systems, primarily the bicarbonate buffer in your extracellular fluid. In the clinical world, we actually use the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation to calculate this buffering capacity so we can diagnose dangerous acid-base disturbances in patients.
To harness all these chaotic chemical reactions, life packages them up into cells. You have your simple prokaryotic cells, like bacteria, which are small and don't have membrane-bound organelles. But then you have our eukaryotic cells. Our cellular factories are highly compartmentalized. We've got the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum acting like these intricate manufacturing lines for proteins and lipids. And of course, you can't forget the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell where oxidative phosphorylation happens. And a really fascinating little detail here, mitochondria actually have their own circular, maternally inherited DNA that is entirely separate from the nucleus.
So we've seen how perfectly engineered this eukaryotic cell is. But I want you to think about this for a second. What actually happens when just one single piece of this microscopic machinery breaks down? Let's ground all this abstract biology in a real-world clinical situation.
Well, the answer lies in lysosomes. Think of these as the waste disposal units of the cell. They are packed with acid hydrolase enzymes designed to break down cellular debris. Now, if just one of these enzymes has a genetic defect and fails, that waste doesn't just disappear. It accumulates, and this leads to devastating conditions known as lysosomal storage diseases, like Tay-Sachs or Gaucher's disease. It just goes to show how incredibly vital every single organelle is, because if the trash isn't taken out, the entire factory ultimately shuts down.
Moving right along to Section 2, carbohydrates, the fast fuel.
Chemically speaking, carbohydrates are polyhydroxyaldehydes and ketones. I know, that's a mouthful. But basically, they are our primary and most rapidly available energy source. You have simple monosaccharides like glucose, which is the universal fuel. But animals, including us, store this fuel as glycogen, which is a massive polysaccharide. And this is a brilliant example of form meeting function. Glycogen in our liver and muscle is densely branched, with a branch roughly every 8 to 12 residues. Why? Because more branches mean more endpoints for enzymes to sort of snip off glucose molecules simultaneously. That allows for rapid energy mobilization when you suddenly need to run or fight. And clinically, we can actually monitor the average levels of glucose floating around in your blood over a 2 to 3 month period using a simple HbA1c test.
Okay, Section 3, lipids. This is where we talk about storage and boundaries.
So if carbs are the fast cash in your wallet, lipids are the gold vault in the basement. They pack a massive 9 kilocalories of energy per gram. That's more than double what you get from carbs or proteins. But lipids do so much more than just store energy. They actually build the factory walls. Take phospholipids, for instance. They have this dual chemical personality, meaning they're amphipathic. They feature a water-loving polar phosphate head and 2 water-hating non-polar fatty acid tails. Because of this one chemical property, when you drop them in water, they spontaneously arrange themselves into a bilayer, hiding their tails and exposing their heads. This is the physical basis for the fluid mosaic model of every single plasma membrane protecting your cells.
There's a bit of a logistical problem on the factory floor, though. Blood is mostly water, and as we just established, lipids are insoluble in water. So how do you transport them? You package them up into lipoproteins. Chylomicrons transport dietary fats straight from your gut. VLDL carries fats made internally by your liver. Then you have LDL, which delivers cholesterol to your tissues. Because it tends to deposit cholesterol in your arteries, you've probably heard it referred to clinically as the bad cholesterol. On the flip side, HDL performs reverse transport, basically sweeping cholesterol away from tissues, which absolutely earns it the title of good cholesterol.
And hey, lipids are also deeply connected to everyday medicine through things called eicosanoids. These are local signaling molecules derived from a 20-carbon lipid called arachidonic acid, and they include prostaglandins, which mediate inflammation, pain, and fever. So when you pop an aspirin or an NSAID for a bad headache, the drug works specifically by inhibiting the cyclooxygenase or COX enzyme. It literally shuts down the lipid pathway that synthesizes those prostaglandins, stopping your pain signal right at the source. Pretty cool, right?
Which brings us to Section 4, Proteins, the biological machines.
Basically, if a biological task needs doing anywhere in your body, a protein is doing it. Their building blocks are amino acids, which are the true alphabet of life. Almost all amino acids in our body take the L form and are chiral, with the exception of glycine. But what is truly fascinating here is their chemical behavior. They are zwitterions. That means amino acids are amphoteric. They can act as both an acid and a base. At normal physiologic pH, they actually exist as dipolar ions, carrying a positive charge on their amino group and a negative charge on their carboxyl group at the exact same time. Because of this, certain amino acids, especially histidine with its unique imidazole side chain, act as phenomenal physiological buffers, absorbing or releasing protons to help keep our blood pH perfectly stable.
Now, there are hundreds of amino acids in nature, but we use just 20 standard ones to build all our proteins. The catch? Our cellular factory cannot synthesize all of them. There are 9 essential amino acids that you absolutely must get from your diet. A really great way to remember them is the mnemonic PV-TIM-HAL. Phenylalanine, valine, threonine, tryptophan, isoleucine, methionine, histidine, leucine, and lysine. If your diet is missing even one of these raw materials, your factory's production lines are going to grind to a halt.
So how do these amino acids actually become working machinery? Well, a protein isn't just a straight line. It has to fold to function. This is guided by Anne Finson's principle, which states that the primary sequence strictly dictates the final 3D shape. It starts with the primary linear sequence joined by rigid peptide bonds. Then, hydrogen bonds form the secondary structure. These are your alpha helices and beta-pleated sheets. Next, driven largely by hydrophobic interactions, it folds into a really complex 3D tertiary structure. Finally, some proteins, like hemoglobin, combine multiple folded subunits into a quaternary structure.
This whole folding process is a masterpiece of biochemistry, but it does make you wonder, how precise must that initial primary sequence actually be? What if, out of a chain of hundreds of amino acids, just a single one is swapped out by mistake?
The gravity of this primary structure is immense. Sickle cell disease, for example, occurs because of a single substitution at position 6 of the hemoglobin beta chain. A polar glutamate is accidentally swapped out for a hydrophobic valine. This tiny microscopic error in the primary sequence causes the entire hemoglobin protein to fold improperly and clump together, warping the red blood cell into a rigid sickle shape and causing severe downstream clinical effects. In biology, structure truly dictates function.
Finally, Section 5, Nucleic Acids, the Master Blueprints. All right, so we've seen the machinery and we've seen the fuel, but where are the instructions to build it all? That lies in our nucleotides, which consist of 3 parts, a nitrogenous base, a pentose sugar, and a phosphate group. Let's look at the 2 main heavy hitters here, DNA and RNA. DNA is the master blueprint, stored securely in the vault of the nucleus. It uses the sugar deoxyribose and the bases adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. It's double-stranded, relying on Watson and Crick's complementary base pairing rules. A pairs with T and C pairs with G. RNA, on the other hand, is the active factory floor copy. It uses ribose, substitutes uracil for thymine, and is typically single-stranded. RNA's job is to actively express those genes as messenger RNA, transfer RNA, and ribosomal RNA to actually build the proteins. And get this,
The sheer volume of DNA inside a single cell is absolutely mind-boggling. If you stretch it all out, it would be roughly 2 meters long. So how on earth do you fit that into a microscopic nucleus? Packaging efficiency. The DNA double helix wraps incredibly tightly around a protein core made of 8 histone proteins, an octamer. We call this structure a nucleosome. It looks almost like beads on a string, and it allows those massive blueprints to be spooled up tightly and safely as chromatin.
Now, before we wrap this up, it is vital to note that nucleotides do far, far more than just store genetics. They are the communication lines and the batteries of the entire cell. ATP, the fundamental energy currency of your body, that's a nucleotide. Cyclic AMP acts as a crucial second messenger to relay hormone signals inside the cell. And NAD+ and FAD are metabolic coenzymes that constantly shuffle electrons around to generate energy. They are literally everywhere in the factory.
So let's step back for a second. We've learned that a tiny pH shift, a missing essential amino acid, or a single letter typo in your DNA can completely halt this entire cellular factory. Yet despite this incredible fragility, these perfectly choreographed biomolecules work flawlessly to keep you alive every single second of every single day. The resilient perfection of your biochemistry is truly breathtaking. But it begs a massive question for us to end on. If the machinery is this delicate and this precise, how did evolution engineer such a perfectly balanced factory in the first place? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope you leave today with a newfound awe for the molecular machinery running inside you right now.